Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this application support webinar for the 2020 call for applications for mobility between program and partner countries, also known as Key Action 107 or the International Credit Mobility. My name is Simona Cavani and I work as part of the Erasmus Plus customer service team. The team member to deliver the webinar with me today is Lara Blagojevic, the Erasmus Plus Higher Education lead. Also, our colleague Sarah Bai is available on the chat facility to answer your questions as we progress through the webinar. Just before I start, let's go over some housekeeping. The presentation will run for approximately 50 minutes, followed by a question and answer session, but please feel free to drop your questions anytime during the webinar. That leads me to another point, which is that the Zoom tool allows you to submit questions via the chat button available on your attendance control panel, which should appear at the bottom of your screen. As the control panel provides other navigating tools, we would like to ask you not to use any of those, please. We have muted your microphones and switched off your cameras, so you shouldn't need to do it yourself. However, please check, and if any of that is on, I would like to ask you to switch it off. If your microphone stays on, it might cause an echo sound to everybody who is listening in. Please note that any questions that you submit are visible to all participants unless you submit them as private, which there might not be the need for it, so please submit your questions to everyone. When it comes to your questions, if possible, please ask questions relevant to the entire audience and try to avoid project-specific questions. At the end of the presentation, or even at the end of specific sections, we will pick the questions that we believe are most relevant to the entire audience and share the answers with you all. If we are not able to answer all your questions before our time is up, we will email you the answers as soon as possible. Also, we will aim to send you the slides by today afternoon. Today, we will go through some general information about Key Action 1, as well as specific rules related to submitting an application for Key Action 107. When it comes to online resources, as you can see in this slide, there are plenty of resources to help you with completing your online application. So I would like to ask you to refer to them when writing your application.
So before we start going through the details of the application process, we'd just like to ask you a question about your experience with submitting an Erasmus Plus online application under Key Action 107. And also, if you have applied, have you been successful or not? This will just help us gauge the audience for today's webinar so that we can go into the appropriate level of detail for you. You should see the poll on your screen now. Great, so that's working. We'll just wait a moment or two to let you vote.
It would be great if as many of you as possible would vote. We will share the results with you, so you should see them shortly on your screens as well, just so you understand who the audience of this webinar is. So again, in the first question, please respond whether you have applied to the Key Action 107 before, and if you have, whether your application has been successful.
So we've got lots of first-time applicants with us today. That's great. So we'll make sure that what we go through with today's webinar is relevant to those applying for, maybe the second, third, fourth time, but also we'll go into the level of detail that you require for the new applicants. And as we've already mentioned, there's lots of resources we're going to point you in the direction of, and we'll tell you what kind of support is available if this is your very first application.
Also, as we can see in the second question, some of you have applied and have not been necessarily successful. So I hope that as we will be talking about the quality questions today in the webinar, it might help in submitting a successful application this time round. Okay, moving on. Thank you very much for voting. When it comes to the type and length of the Erasmus Plus mobility that you can apply for under the Key Action 107, You can apply for 4 different types of mobility. For students, there are student study mobility and student traineeship mobility. Study mobility must be between 3 and 12 months, and traineeship between 2 and 12 months. If a mobility for student traineeship is combined with studies, the minimum duration is 3 months, not 2. For staff, there are staff training mobility and staff teaching mobility. Minimum duration of staff mobility is 5 days, excluding travel. Please note that for combined teaching and training placements for staff, the minimum number of teaching hours is 4 hours per week, not 8. When considering durations, please note that the European Commission considers 1 month to be 30 days, which is nice and easy. So for example, 3 months would be 90 days. You must apply for all funding types in one application form. That means that if you are considering applying for all 4 types of mobility, you need to include them all under just one application. You need to make up your mind at the application stage. We'll pop out of the PowerPoint later on to show you where you find and how you draft your mobilities in the application. When to apply? The 5th February 2020 at 11 a.m. UK time is the deadline for submitting applications under Key Action 1. Please ensure you begin working on your application as soon as possible, as the closer to the deadline we are, the busier the Erasmus Plus help desk becomes. So while we do our best to support all applicants, this may not be possible if you submit questions right before the deadline. And the other reason why it is good to start working as soon as possible is also the narrative part of this type of application, because Key Action 107 is more comprehensive than Key Action 103, as many of you may know by now. It may be useful to know that once the form is submitted, you will be able to reopen and resubmit it repeatedly if you wish, until the submission deadline has expired. The latest submission is the one that will be accepted and evaluated by us at the UK National Agency. There is also an alternative submission procedure if you suffer technical issues that prevent you from submitting your application, and the link to this process is provided in our written application guidance on our website. And obviously for these reasons, we will be ready to help you on the day or the days before. So we will definitely encourage you at the end of this webinar to be in touch with us if you experience any technical difficulties with your application portal.
I would add into that there, Simone has already mentioned the importance of working on the application as soon as possible. Those of you already on the portal will have noticed that it's started to become a little bit slower this week because of the sheer volume of people working on applications across Europe. So do give yourself plenty of time, because the portal can experience some technical difficulties.
And we do expect the portal will be down on the day of submission deadline. That is a normal practice. And again, as Lara mentioned, this is due to the volume of applications that the system tries to accept. Okay, let's talk about the Erasmus Charter for Higher Education. So if your institution doesn't currently hold the Erasmus Charter for Higher Education, in short ECHE, you unfortunately won't be able to apply for the Erasmus Plus funding under the 2020 call. On the other hand, if you are awarded an ECHE, you are awarded it for the program duration, or rather for the duration of your project, and you do not need to apply for it again. If you are not sure if your institution holds an ECHE or whether it is valid, you can check via the ECHE list online by clicking on the website hyperlink that is provided in this slide. It might be worth mentioning that we expect that probably majority, if not all of you, will have valid ECHE, but it's good to double check that. We know that the Commission will not be releasing an application call for ECHE in 2020, so simply if you don't hold an ECHE, there won't be opportunity to apply for it this time round. And this is purely because the Commission is preparing for launching the new program shortly, and we expect that everything will start over again as part of the new program. Okay. So participation An identification code, in short PIC, and organization ID, in short OID. This is a new topic for all of us. So the organization ID has replaced the PIC as the unique identifier of, for an organization to apply. So organizations that have a PIC and have previously applied for funding in the Erasmus Plus through the national agency have been automatically assigned the organization ID, and this is very important information for you. So if you had PIC before, you now have OID because it has been generated by the Commission automatically for all existing PICs. What essentially happened is that the European Commission has decided to launch both PICs and OIDs, and Commission will keep PIC and administer PIC numbers for all centralized projects. That means projects that are submitted directly to the Commission. And for decentralized projects, they created these new OIDs for national agencies to manage OIDs and decentralized projects. So again, don't start creating a new OID because you may already have it. So you can use the organization registration system that we mentioned in the slide to check your organization ID, as well as change some of the information about your organization in there. Alternatively, if you haven't made an application before to the Erasmus Plus program and you do not have an organization ID, this is exactly what you will need to be doing through the system. You will be creating a new organization ID for your organization using this new organization registration system. So again, if you have one, please don't attempt. We have experienced in last week or so that this has been overlooked by experienced coordinators around UK higher education institutions, and there have been attempts to create a new OID. It will become complicated because it needs to be then clarified which OID is valid, which is not, because there can be simply only one number per organization as one unique identifier of your organization.
Something that we will mention again later, but I'll mention it here now in case we get a question, because it's quite a common question on K107. Those who applied before, you'll remember that you didn't need to input PICs for your partners, and the same is true of OID, so it's not compulsory to have the OID for your partner organizations.
Okay, moving on, let's talk about mobility consortia, as it is a topic that we get asked about. A mobility consortium is when a group of organizations submit an application form for funding. A consortium must comprise of at least 3 eligible UK-based organizations, and 2 of which must be sending higher education institutions that have been awarded Erasmus Charter for higher education. There is a separate form specifically for the Mobility Consortium Accreditation Certificate, and the number is Key Action 108. And you will be able to access this form as part of the other applications that are available to you in the application portal. You can submit your consortium application at the same time as your mobility application. And as how it works is simply your consortium application would be assessed first. And if it is successful, only then the national agency would proceed with assessing your application for funding. And vice versa, if your application for consortium would be unsuccessful, then we would not proceed with assessing your application for funding. You can apply, that means that you can apply for the same type of funding twice, once as an individual organization and as well as consortium. That is the only opportunity how you could possibly submit 2 applications for one type of funding. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about the online application form. Institutions do ask us if they can apply concurrently or at the same time for other funding stream than Key Action 107 under the same call, meaning under the 2020 call. The answer to this is simply yes. You will see in the application portal, and I will take you there shortly, that there is a separate form for the international credit mobility, as well as for other key actions, for example, Key Action 103. So for each key action, we regularly prepare plenty of application guidance. So if you are considering applying for other funding than Key Action 107, then just refer to our guidance or to the pre-recorded webinars that we will be releasing on our website shortly. Regarding submitting more applications under the same key action, as I mentioned a minute ago, meaning under the same funding stream, such as if you were considering to submit 2 applications for Key Action 107, that would be only possible if we applied as a single organization and as part of the consortium. Otherwise, that wouldn't be possible. The next question that we often receive is whether you have to include information on your partner higher education institutions, which Lara already mentioned. So under the Key Action 107, you have to provide information about your partners. However, you do not need to include their organization IDs.
So what about applying for more than one application per one key action? It has been known in the past that we've received KO 107 applications from different departments within your university. So what I would say that internal communication, very important, because if that did happen, if we received 2 Key Action 107 applications from one institution, we are only able to accept the most recent submission. So it's very important that as a university, if that is a possibility, that you understand if there might be a bid coming from another department within your institution, because that's not possible under this action, unfortunately, and you would need to somehow sort of merge those bids together.
It doesn't happen very often, but it did happen in the past, and it's true that it doesn't happen, I think, at all for Key Action 103, that are usually managed by one department, but with 107 it can be the case, so please make sure that there is no other department drafting 107 application, and if so, it should be in conjunction with you if you are drafting another one. Some beneficiaries have been wondering whether there are any disadvantages to apply for a shorter or longer project duration. The answer to this is no, because from the assessment point of view, there aren't really any disadvantages in choosing any of the 2 possible lengths of project. It is at your organization's discretion, but if, for example, there has been an underspend in your organization's previous Erasmus Plus project, it would be worth considering applying for the longer duration of the project, as this would simply allow you it would allow you more time in delivering the project and spending the allocated funding. If the legal representative is different to previous calls, and I suppose this is information that is relevant to those of you who have been working on the program for some time and are experienced, but you tend to confuse 2 things together. For the application, it doesn't matter. Whoever is your legal representative just now, the same person needs to sign the declaration of honor that is generated as part of your online application, and that's all you need to do. It is only in the future, if the legal representative changes, you need to go through some paperwork with us to amend the records with us. But at the application stage is nice and easy. Your legal representative signs the declaration of honor and you submit your application. Regarding mandatory annexes for the application, the declaration of honor is the only mandatory annex that you need to attach to your online application. There is possibility to submit other files if you wish to do that in order to support your application, but it's not mandatory.
Another common query that we get at this time of year is what you should do if your legal representative is away this month or unwell, anything like that that means they're not able to sign the form. In that instance, what you would need to do is contact your HR department for a letter which confirms that somebody else effectively is able to sign in the legal representative's absence, and then that person should sign the declaration of honour instead. So it would be an alternative signatory, and then you would need the confirmation letter from HR to say that yes, this person is legally allowed to sign on behalf of the institution. And in that instance, you would also upload that letter from your HR department with the declaration of honour form, just so that we know when we start our assessment why it isn't the named legal representative who has signed the declaration of honour.
So the 2020 online application forms, as was the case in previous calls, is accessible from many sites, such as from the UK National Agency's website or the European Commission's website. Simply whichever way you choose, you will land in the application portal. You will need EU login, as many of you know, to access the portal. So if you already have your logins to the Mobility Tool Plus, you will be using the same ones. At the same time, if you haven't had or if you haven't established your EU login yet, it's really nice because the page itself will prompt you to create one. It's quick, and then you will be able to access the portal. So let's go on to the portal page now.
If the screen goes blank at any point, please don't worry, we haven't lost you. It's just because we're navigating between different screens here.
Lovely. So we are in. So once you are in the portal, click on the higher education, which, as you can see, will lead you to the group of online applications relevant to you as a higher education institution. As Lara is currently hovering over Key Action 108, that is your application for a consortium if you are deciding to apply as a consortium. So this one would be submitted at the same time as your application for funding, which is right next to it on the left, which is Key Action 107. So to enter the application form, just click on the blue button Apply. It may be useful to know that as you work through the form, it automatically saves your work every 2 seconds, as you can see in the green field. You will also be able to go in and out of the application as you wish, right until the submission deadline on the 5th of February, as Lara is showing you just now. So if you want to close the form and work on it at a later day, you can access the application under My Applications tab and choose simply your draft application. We will probably recommend just bookmarking this page, this application portal page, for an easy access. So every online application starts with the welcome message, reminding you of the European Commission's guidelines. And I would highly recommend at least a quick scroll through so you have a good understanding of all the aspects of the online form. You can return to the guidelines anytime by clicking on the guidelines on the left-hand side vertical menu. Context refers to the project start and the end date, the duration of the project, the national agency, and the language relevant to your project. So all of you will be choosing UK 01, British Council as your national agency, and the language is English. The end date will be populated automatically as soon as you choose the length of your project, the project duration in the middle part. As the title says, in the next section, you will be completing information about your organization by entering the organization ID that we spoke about previously. All details of your organization are then generated automatically based on the organization ID. So you need to keep your organization system data in the registration system up to date. The section is also a place to define whether you are applying on behalf of a consortium or not. So whilst this is a fairly straightforward section, I would like to draw your attention to the project contacts and encourage you to nominate 3 contacts straight from the start to avoid filling additional forms with us later on. So if you scroll down here, you will see that I have nominated 2. You will have 1 legal representative, but you can add 3 additional contacts. And these are contacts that are then within their rights to contact the national agency and ask any project specific questions when your application, as soon as your application is successful. So these contacts will be transferred into our database, and it's then easy for you to contact us and require any information about your project. Okay, if you want to close the form, no, let's not close the form now. Let's move on to the next article, which is section 3, your partner countries. So you will be adding partner countries that you wish to work with. And as we mentioned previously, you will not need to complete their OIDs there. You will just be selecting the country.
You can see there, that's why the OID box is in green, because it's, if you have it, great, but you don't need to put it in. It's not compulsory. The areas that are compulsory on the form will always be marked with this kind of red line on the side.
Yep. So you will be identifying institutions that you wish to cooperate with and the main activities, which means that the type of mobilities, as we spoke about, you've got a selection of 4 types of mobilities, 2 types for students, 2 types for staff. And you will need to decide at this application stage what types of mobilities you would like to apply for. And more importantly, you will also need to answer quality questions. And we will be talking a little bit more about that at later stage of this webinar, as Lara will take you through the quality questions.
Anything that you put in there for the mobilities, the main activities section, that will pull through into the budget summary section. Please cross-check the 2, because it has been known in past years for there to be some technical issues that mean that the 2 don't quite correspond. So one of the last checks you should do on the form is to make sure that the number of mobilities that you want is correct and that it looks like it's generated the budgets correctly as well. If you're not sure, you can contact us at the national agency and we can check it with you as well.
Absolutely. So regarding the section for annexes, as mentioned previously, all you need to do is to download and then you just, so you download a document from here, then you sign the document and you upload it back in. As you can see further down, you can add other files in order to support your application if you wish to do that. However, it is not a compulsory, mandatory part of submitting your online application. So in the last section, checklist, that is there to ensure that you have completed all compulsory parts of the application. You will need to tick all boxes, including the data protection notice at the very bottom, in order to be able to submit your application. I think that's it. Quickly but one thing that I wanted to also show you is, because we spoke about the organization ID. So as soon as you are entering information about your organization, and we are using the test OID number for the British Council. If you are not sure what your OID is, the Commission has embedded this link directly in the application portal. So all you need to do is to click on it, and you will be able to search. So this is the landing page, and so if I put British Council, it will. As you can see, this is our test PIC. This is our former PIC number, test PIC number, and this is our new OID. So all I have done is that I copied and pasted it into the application. So that's the whole trick. And so if in doubt, you will be able, of course, to search not only for your OID, but also for your partner's OID if you wish to do that. But you know already that you don't have to enter OIDs for your partners as part of your application. Okay, so let's return to the presentation now. I will just quickly swap the slides. Okay, and I will hand over to Lara.
Thanks, Mona. Okay, so hello everyone. After that technical guide to the form and how you apply, we're going to move on now to talk about budgets and the quality aspect of a Key Action 107 application. Which is the really important aspect that makes this very different from Key Action 103. So first of all, we'll start with what's new for 2020. Well, unsurprisingly, as this is the last year of the current Erasmus Plus programme, no major changes, but just a few to note. We have additional funding for cooperation with the Ukraine this year, which you'll see when we go through the envelope slides in more detail in the next slides, actually. Those who applied last year might remember that we had a number of different envelopes that were basically all funding for Africa. This has been simplified a bit this year, which again I'll note on the next slide for you. In the past 2 calls, we've had Region 14. Now that's the Faroe Islands and Switzerland. This is not being repeated for the 2020 call, so you won't be able to bid for these countries this year. This was funding that was just for outgoing digital traineeships to those 2 countries. So this is not being repeated. When you go into the online form, you may still see the Faroe Islands and Switzerland in the application form on the drop-down menu as a partner country. Please ignore it because they should soon be removed, and it's definite that there's no funding available for them in this call. Okay. So I've mentioned the word envelope there quite a bit. So for those applying for the first time, when we talk about envelopes, essentially these are groups of countries with an allocated budget according to the European Commission's priorities and where the funding comes from within the European Commission. The important thing to note with these is the different rules per envelope, which you'll see on the far right of your screen on the slide. It's also important to note the amount of funding available per kind of group of country, if you will, rather than envelope. What I would say, this is important to note because they vary a great deal, and this will have a bearing on your chances of success within that group of countries. So for example, you have a very large budget like the ENI Region South that you can see there, second one down, compared to a small budget such as the Industrialised Americas. So if you compare those two, there's a big difference. Please don't worry about the envelope names. You don't need to memorize these. It's for our information really. On the form, you'll just be asked to select a country, and then us as the national agency, we allocate the funding from these budgets accordingly. So as I said, don't worry about the names, just to look at the rules per envelope and also the budget available so you know how likely it is you would be able to gain that funding. All of this information is available on our website. There is a form that you can download, a PDF that you can download with all of these budgets on it. So I'm just going to move slowly through the slides, and don't worry about making notes of the budget amounts at the moment. As I've mentioned, so last year there were lots of different Africa budgets. They've been condensed this year, but the amount available for African countries still remains very large because it's a priority region for the EC. This budget here refers to the national agency's funding for outward mobility at cycle 1 and 2 to the EDF and DCI envelopes. Now, this is to address the UK's outward mobility strategy and encourage mobility at those levels. We're often asked if you need to create a separate bid for this envelope. Well, no, that's not the case. You just need to include the relevant mobility, so cycle 1 or 2, that's undergrad or masters, under the relevant DCI or EDF country when you select it on the form. So for example, China, you would put in undergraduate mobility for that. You don't need to create sort of an outward mobility bid separately. This budget has increased this year. It was around 880,000 last year. You can see it's just over £1 million now. And just to note there on that slide, as I've mentioned, there is additional funding for the North Africa countries and the Ukraine, in addition to the usual envelopes for these countries. Traditionally, the Ukraine has been quite a popular partner choice, so very pleased to have that additional funding available this year. Okay. So let's move on to quality now, and what you need to do to be successful with a KA 107 bid. This is the award criteria for Key Action 107. When you apply, your application, so the narrative section, goes to one of our external experts, and they will look at the 4 quality questions for each set of mobility flows and each partner country that you've applied for. Each country receives a score. So important to note, you might be successful in some countries, but not in others. So it's not sort of a pass or fail for your entire application. It's looked at per country. In some instances, you might pass the quality threshold. So as you can see there, that's 60 points out of a possible 100. But you may not receive funding if the competition in that envelope is very high. This would be the case, for instance, in those smaller envelopes I've already mentioned, like the Americas, for instance. Within that 60 points out of 100, which is the minimum score to pass the quality threshold, you need to have at least 15 points on the relevance of strategy question, which is the first one. Now, this is a very wordy slide, so apologies for this, but what I thought would be useful is to extract this from the application form to save us going back and forth. So these are actually the quality questions that you need to complete per country. So these 4 questions will pop up for every country that you select on the form. I'm sure you've seen these already, or I really do hope you have. Please read them carefully. You can do as I've done, copy and paste them into your own document and sort of read them carefully and make notes yourself. If this is your first 107 application, the bit you need to take note of here is that this is per country. So you need to do 4 questions for everyone that you select. I would recommend working on these questions offline until you're happy with what you're written. Then you can copy and paste into the online form. But please be mindful of the word count with that and check that before, 10 a.m. on submission day, for example.
So if I take you quickly to the portal, you will be able to see the word count there. So see, these are the quality questions for Brazil. If I selected other 5 countries I would like to work with, I would need to complete the same sections 6 times altogether, and obviously the answers will be unique to every country. But this is the word count that Sarah talked about. So sorry, Lara, apologies. If you work, as we have just mentioned, if you work offline in your Word documents or anything, please just be careful, because as you copy and paste, once your word count or character count is up, then it will the character count will be up. It will cut off your text. So you need to double check that that your text is what you meant to put in, and it's not halfway through. Yeah,
sorry everyone, we've said word count there,
it will not compromise with you, unfortunately. So at the at 7,000 it will cut you off. Okay, I'll take you back.
Yes, sorry, I said word count there. It is character count, actually. It's not word count, so apologies for that. You'll see if you start typing in that box, it's a character count, because then the sort of running total will increase for you.
Okay.
So what I'll do is talk about the 4 questions and what you should be doing under each one. So question 1 is your relevance question. So it's about why you want to work with the particular country that you've chosen. This is where you should talk about why you've chosen the country, why you've chosen the partners, why is it strategically important to your institution. You should also talk about the reasoning behind the mobility flows that you've chosen. So for example, some universities start new partnerships with staff mobility because they want to build a partnership or explore synergies. Or perhaps you and your chosen partner both specialize in the same academic subject, so your mobility is focused on student mobility in that area. Whatever it is that you've chosen as mobility between your 2 institutions, or yourself and multiple partner institutions, you need to make sure that you've presented a clear case for why you've requested that type of mobility. Question 2 is around quality of cooperation. So this asks you to detail your previous experience working with the partner country. If you don't have any, consider which other countries you work with that might provide the appropriate experience, or consider how you would gain the expertise and knowledge that you need. This is where you will talk about the roles and responsibilities within the partnership. So who does what. It shouldn't be one-sided, remember. Your partner should also be active in the project. There's not an expectation that you as coordinator take all of that responsibility on. Question 3 is quality of project design. So this is the who, what and when of how the mobility will work in practice. Think about all of the phases from promotion, selection and preparation through to the mobility itself, and then what type of follow-up there will be. I know this is your day-to-day job, so some of this might seem very, very obvious to you, but you need to be clear and transparent so that an assessor can see what you plan to do. So somebody who doesn't know your day-to-day role needs to understand how this mobility will be supported and implemented. Now, question 4 is the one that consistently scores the lowest across applications. This is dissemination and impact. This is where you should talk about how you assess the impact of your activities and also how you disseminate your success stories, your lessons learned, publications, any results of the project. Think about how you will promote your project throughout its lifetime and share its achievements. And similarly, think about impact throughout the project lifetime, not just as a final assessment. Partners are also important to this section. So it's not just impact on you as coordinator, it's impact on your consortium as a whole. So I've already started giving a few kind of hints and tips there. What I'm going to show you now is a very useful resource from the European Commission. So these next 2 slides are taken from the European Commission's Do's and Don'ts booklet on ICM. An earlier slide actually has a link to this, but it's also on our website. I won't read through it all, but I will pick out a few highlights that I think are important. So something I really can't say enough is don't forget your partners. This is a consistent weakness that's picked up by our assessors, is people forget sometimes to talk about what the partners bring to the partnership. what are their aims, what are their strategies, and what are they hoping to get out of the project as well. Why did you pick that partner? How do they fit with you? Tell us about their strengths and tell us about how the two of you will develop in the project. Sometimes applicants write from their own perspective only. I mean, it's a really easy trap to fall into because you're probably the one writing, but it's important to talk to your partners and understand what they want from the project too. There's some specific and helpful tips here from the EC as well. So for example, providing quantifiable information is very useful. So the size of your partner or university, perhaps, the number of people you expect to reach through a newsletter for your dissemination. There is a character limit, as we've already mentioned, so be clear and concise with what you say. Now the angry red don'ts box. Don't copy and paste from your previous applications. Assessors pick up on this. If you're applying for a country you've previously been successful in gaining funding for, what you need to do is demonstrate how the partnership has developed or progressed. So not presenting the same bid again, essentially. So perhaps you're adding student mobility to something that was previously staff only. Perhaps you're including a different subject area. Perhaps it's the next stage of a research. Just show how it has developed. I've kind of already touched on this, but please don't assume knowledge in your application. It's an external expert who's looking at this application, and they don't know necessarily everything about your institution, everything about you and your role. So be specific about your arrangements and be specific about your experience as a university, and really shout about your experiences and your strengths. If you've applied before, I would recommend reviewing the feedback, whether you were successful or unsuccessful. What has been noted for improvement? What did you do really well in the last application if you were successful? You'll notice that the EC has highlighted applying for lots and lots of countries and using the same rationale. This doesn't work generally, because assessors want to see evidence that you have considered your choice of countries and tailored your answers accordingly. You probably have one internationalization strategy, yes, but how does that apply to the different countries? Are there different strands you can pull out of it? There must be different choices behind why you want to work with different countries. Now, that's an awful lot of information that I've thrown at you there. So what I'm going to do is end on a few points to consider when you're writing your narrative. As I've already said, a consistent weak point noted by assessors is not having a good enough understanding of partner aims and their context, so please don't forget them. Applications should be well balanced and show clear benefit for all parties involved in the mobility partnership. Similarly, you can reach out to other departments and academic schools to understand what type of mobility is needed and is viable. Some bids that are really focused in on a particular discipline or a research project, and sometimes you don't know what great things are being done in other areas of your university that could open up an interesting and really unique ICM partnership. If you haven't already, start writing. Please do start writing soon, and get someone to proofread. So if you're writing a large bid in particular, it's really easy to make mistakes. So get somebody to come and read it for you. Somebody outside of your team is ideal because they'll have a complete fresh set of eyes, but at least get someone else to look through it. Impact and dissemination, consistently the area of the application where people score the lowest. So to score well here, you need to think about ongoing activities throughout the 2 or 3 years of your project. As I've said, impact assessment is not just at the end. How do you know how your project is going? How do you think that you will assess the project throughout its lifetime and assess whether it's achieving its aims? And with dissemination, it's not just about sharing a final product, telling us how your whole project went. You need to consider how you might share things like success stories or lessons learned, basically anything positive, or even, like I said, a lesson learned doesn't even need to be positive, but it's something that you've picked up throughout the project. How will you share that with an audience during the project lifetime? And finally, a note on accuracy, moving away from quality a little bit, but some of the issues we saw in 2018 and 2019 were people writing in the narrative about a number and a type of mobility, but this was not matching what had been requested. So be accurate, remember to cross-check. Assessors pick up on this as well, and it also slows down the assessment process when we need to come back to you and query. So for example, if you write in your narrative that you want to send 10 undergraduates, but there's no undergraduate mobility requested, we have to come back and check that with you. So again, if you can ask somebody just to go through that and make sure that everything adds up, that will mean that your bid is really clear and we'll go through the assessment process that a little bit quicker. So thank you so much for your time with that. I appreciate it's an awful lot of information this early on a Friday morning, but please, if you have any questions, you're very welcome to ask them today or come back to us after the webinar. And I'm going to pass back to Simona now to talk about submission.
Thank you very much for that, Lara. I just recalled one question, and apologies for putting you on spot. We just received a few similar questions in past couple of weeks from beneficiaries or from applicants for Key Action 107 who, for example, just recently joined the team at new HEI for them and are trying to improve on the application, and mentioned that they are aware that in previous years they haven't been able to spend the budget. So if it is something that they should actually comment on in the application now, just to explain why they previously weren't able to deliver as they planned, so they applied for a bigger budget than they actually were spending on it. That was mainly due to changes in the teams, then coordinators might have left. So is it something essential to include possibly in the application or rather not?
Honestly, I think that's at your discretion. I think information like that is helpful because as part of the assessment process, an assessor may think, okay, so they've been offered a large bid before and not been able to fulfill it. So if you think it's useful, as I said, to be transparent to the assessor on your situation, then yes, you can include it. I would say that kind of information is much more vital in a final report for the project, because that's where we're really looking at, did you achieve your aims, and if you didn't, why? So yeah, you can include some context, and that might be something to say that previously you've bid for, I don't know, staff mobility with university, but it's not gone as well as planned. So that you and your partners have revisited your partnership and reconsidered what might work for you. So I think there's a way of wording it in your application that could be helpful and show that you've assessed your situation and your context.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for that. So let's just hop back onto the application portal quickly. And again, this is your landing page. Just please be mindful, you probably will see only the first two menu options, not the following three. And as we said, this is where you start your application. And in my applications, this is where you return to your draft applications. So as we see, we have drafted plenty of them by now. So if I go back again and talk a little bit about the submission process itself, it is important to understand that you will be able to click on the submit button only after all sections are completed, which you can see that those completed correctly are ticked off with the green tick and are missing bits with the red exclamation marks. Once you complete your application and submit, you will receive a confirmation message, so you will know whether you have submitted or not. It might come back with error message, which are exactly the reasons why we will be here for you on the deadline dates and shortly before that. Definitely, please don't submit application before you are happy with it, so you don't need to go back and forth too much. So work for it as long as you need, and submit only when you're happy. But as we mentioned previously, even if you do submit and then you would like to implement any changes, you will be able to return to application that already has been submitted as long as the deadline hasn't passed. Your applications then, once we receive it and after the deadline for applying, we will check them first for eligibility. And applications that are eligible are then taken on for further assessment that is delivered by external experts. The notification of award is within 4 months from the submission deadline. So if you are submitting on the 5th of February, that will be 5th of June, by which you should hear about whether your application has been successful or not. So there is a time needed also for the national agencies to go through the 2 stages of assessing your applications. So during as every day all year round, we are available at the help desk for you. You can call us daily from 10 until 4. And obviously you can submit us emails on the erasmus@britishcouncil.org. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar, please be mindful that the help desk will become very busy because we do expect technical difficulties with the portal due to volume of applications that organizations will try to submit shortly before the deadline. So I can't stress enough the importance of trying to submit your application rather sooner. but if you do experience any difficulties, or even if you don't and you just want to consult anything, please contact us.
Okay. So the final thing we'll do before we move on to just going through any questions that we might have missed while we've been talking, we just want to launch one more poll, which is a satisfaction survey, as we very much appreciate your feedback. This is the first year as well that we've split the webinar into 103 and 107. So we're very keen to get feedback on well, whether that works for you. And then we'll go through some questions and answers. You're very welcome to stay on the line.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of very interesting questions that have come through, and Sarah has responded to them. So I think they were very quality questions and relevant questions. Thank you for that. And I hope you all could see both of it, the answers and the questions and the answers. But as you could see in the first poll that we run today, there are a couple of new people that joined the Erasmus Plus family, and I would like to mention especially to you who are new, there is no silly question to ask, so please don't be afraid to contact us anytime, because the sooner we clarify things for you, how it works, not only about the application itself, but in general around the program, the more confident you will be shortly, and you will probably need that as everybody who have started in Erasmus Plus roles, including us.
I just say, Natalie, I can't agree more with what you've just said. I would please avoid Internet Explorer with the mobility tool, the application portal. It doesn't like it for some reason. I'm not techie enough to know why, but yes,
the preferred browser for any Commission's tools is Chrome. So if you can please work in Chrome, not only on your application, but later on also in a mobility tool plus, that is simply for the easiest software to use.
Okay. So we're just going to take a moment to go through and see which questions we may have missed. I can see Sarah's been answering those as we've gone along.
I will take you in the meantime back to not only the application portal, but what I wanted to launch is another page, which is our Erasmus Plus homepage. So in the, if you go through the menu, if you can obviously use not only the menu, but you can also use the icons here, but this is what I'm used to doing. So if you go into the menu button and hover over apply for funding, move on to the higher education funding, hover over, and you can see these are the funding streams currently available to apply for. So if you apply for international credit mobility, it will take you to the page that carries all the important information that you need in order to submit your application. And I would probably draw your attention especially to the right-hand side menu. You can access the web application portal from here, but we have released 2020 guidance for applicants who wish to apply for Key Action 107. Also the envelopes that we spoke about, so as Lara took you through the envelopes, you can revisit it. So these are the current envelopes. You can see how much budget has been released for each of the envelopes. It's a simple 2-pager document with all the countries and opportunities that you can undertake. The second, probably most important, I would say, after this webinar will be the application guide that will take you step by step through the entire application process, especially for those of you who are submitting application for the first time. So please refer to this website. And of course, you can, if you are interested in applying for other types of funding, again, you can choose what's available under 2020 call in this website.
I think Marianne has raised something really relevant there about some of the information that you put in the quality questions being repeated. So what we're referring to there is specifically the kind of arrangements for mobility question. We get asked this quite a lot. If you go in the do's and don'ts document from the EC, they say that you can write that out in full once and then refer back to it. So your first country that you complete, I believe it's alphabetically, isn't it? So, yeah. Yeah, so it's the first one alphabetically. If you write out all your mobility arrangements, if that process will stay the same for each country, you can refer back to, you know, as completed under question 3 for Australia, for example. What I would say though is do think about whether you do need to consider any linguistic differences, for instance, or like visa difficulties you might have with a particular country. So whilst the kind of bare bones of the mobility structure and how you administer it might stay the same, there might still be a few things you have to note that would be different per country. So again, just give it some consideration. But that's the one question where you can sort of go back and say, this will be the same process for our project. A few people have raised the issue about not being able to go back to my applications. Actually, this is something I'm experiencing as well with my test application. So you have to go via the opportunities tab and open up, say, 103 or 107 again via the higher education bit there that Simona's helpfully hovering over. And it will come up then saying open existing draft. Really sorry for that. I have logged it with the Commission, but they've just given me that workaround at the moment for going via the link again. So you won't lose your information. It's a little frustrating. I know it's not saved in my applications, but it's an issue they are aware of.
It's just a bit temperamental because sometimes it is there, sometimes it doesn't. But also please bear in mind that the Commission has launched this search filter. It wasn't available last year. So it might just not correctly filter your applications. So you just need to set up if you want to filter for Key Action 1, or if you want to filter for Key Action 2, then you search. So it should I should be then taken only to my draft applications under Key Action 2. So please try this tool, whether it helps. But we have noticed that it's become a little bit temperamental. Again, it's 2 weeks before the submission deadline. So you should encounter for technical difficulties.
Ava, thank you for your message about the duration on the website. We'll check that after the webinar and make sure that the website is displaying the correct number of minimum days. So thanks for raising that with us. Yeah, Rosanne, you shouldn't need to close everything every time. Hopefully that will be a workaround for you. I said not the most intuitive workaround for the forms, but at least it doesn't lose your information. There may be a few questions that we haven't quite had time to go through here, so we might follow up on email with 1 or 2. But if anyone wants to send anything additional now, we can make sure we capture the questions and get back to you as soon as possible.
Right, thank you very much for all your questions, and thank you very much for your time today. And on behalf of the team here at the UK National Agency, I would like to thank you for your patience, and I wish you all the best with your applications for Key Action 107, and please be in touch. Have a good day, everybody.